today's call, I want to work on um, how to improve your students, as well as how to get them to love and rave about your classes. I mean, just absolutely fall in love with your classes and want to keep taking them for years to come, right? And to be honest, in order for them to keep coming to your classes, you kind of need both of these things, right? If they just love your classes, like they really enjoy them, but they aren't improving, then eventually they're probably going to seek somewhere else because they are looking to improve their dancing. It might not be their main goal, depending on, maybe they want to socialize, or maybe they just want exercise or things like that. But most people, as they get more and more advanced, they want to really improve their dancing. So you got to have both of these. And if you just improve their dancing, but you don't get them to love your classes, then also they're going to start to get bored and lose interest, and eventually they'll just stop taking your classes, or find someone else that both improves their dancing and helps them, really enjoy the classes. So that's what we're going to cover during this next hour. And the thing that I want you guys to focus on is getting different methods, right? Making sure that you have clear methods. So each of these is a different method on how to improve your students. And each of these is a different method I use to make sure that my students love the classes, right? And I'm actually going to use some of these while I'm teaching you right now, but I'll tell you about that later, right? Because these are things your students, they don't need to know that you're doing these things. These are things that you're doing in the background so that so you're doing them, that you're checking off things that are going to make them improve, and you're doing things that are going to make them love your classes and rave and talk about your classes, right? But it doesn't need to be something where, what was I saying? Sorry. Oh, these are things that go in the background, right? They aren't things that your students need to know that you're doing. It's things that you need to know that you're doing so that you're confident that you're improving your students, and you're confident that you're making sure that they fall in love with your classes and they actually rave about them and talk about them to other people, right? Get your classes to go viral. So it's really important to have different methods that you're using that you can know you're confident work, right? And that's what we're going to do in this class. We're going to give you these methods, as well as kind of inspire you how to create your own methods, right? Because these are my methods, and absolutely use these methods. You don't have to credit me or anything, just use them. If you want to credit me, great, especially if you're doing a teacher training. But at the same time, use these methods and then improve on them and make them your own, because that's really when you start to find your own voice, is when you start using concepts and making them your own, right? But at first, you got to use something. If you don't have anything, you got to start using something. And you probably have your own ideas on how to do these as well. You'll start to notice once you start teaching more, you'll be, oh, that's something that really makes my students love and rave my classes. Let's write it down in the list of things that I have to use, right? And you want to have hundreds of these things. You want to have a ton of different things to get students to love and rave your classes, because not all of them will work in every situation, right? For instance, the first one I'm going to teach you, I don't really see how I could use that one now. Maybe I could, but I don't see the appropriateness. Whereas the last one, I'm definitely using today. So let's get into things, okay? So let's talk about this first one. This first one is what I call the Superman slow motion analysis, right? Or Superman slow motion, Superman analysis, right? So, and you'll notice Superman slow-mo. Over here, I also have blank slow-mo. That's because this first one actually works in both situations. It will improve your students, and it's going to get them to love and rave your classes. So I'm going to write it in here. Superman. All right. So this concept is, right, this concept is all about, oh, you'll also notice I've got these little check marks along, you see these check marks here? you can ignore those for right now. I'll tell you what they are towards the end, but right now, don't worry about them. They're more for me than for you. Okay, so Superman slow motion. The idea here is to get your students to start to practice slow motion, but to realize how much value there is in it. So I give them a little story, right? I don't just say, okay, we're going to practice slow motion. No, I get them to want to practice slow motion. And I do that by making them feel like they're Superman or Superwoman, right? And so I start out class saying, okay, today I'm going to teach you how to be Superman or Superwoman, right? I'm going to do that I want you to think of when somebody shoots a gun, right? As a human, we see the explosion, right? The spark of the gun. We see, or we hear the noise of it starting, and then we see the impact of it hitting somebody, right? But we don't see the actual bullet travel all along the way to the impact, right? Whereas Superman, he's got such a fine-tuned eye, so he's so fast and so clear on everything that he can see the bullet travel every single moment of the way from the shot to the impact, right? And that's what I want you guys to do today, is I want you to see every single moment of the way from, and this is where I tie it in to whatever we're practicing, right? So a lot of times it's counterbalance that I'm using this concept for, and I want them not just to see the start of counterbalance and the end of counterbalance, but I want them to see every single moment going through counterbalance, right? And so that's what I'm doing. And I'm actually going to let you guys see how I implement this in a class so that you can literally copy me word for word if you want. I wouldn't recommend writing down the exact words. I'd recommend just having the general idea, maybe having some bullet points that you want to make sure you cover. But I want you to see how easy it can be and how it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, I'm going to show you, it's just a minute-long video of me explaining this to a class. And it's not the best audio, so I apologize if it's not, perfect audio, but I think it will give you the idea. Here we go.
We're going to work on counterbalance for this class. And my goal with you guys in this class is to turn you into Superman and Superwoman when it comes to counterbalance. And what I mean by that is, just like in real life, if someone were to take a gun and shoot it, right, we would see the explosion or hear that it fires, right? And then we would see the impact that happens on someone else. But we probably wouldn't see the bullet traveling to the impact, right? Our eyes just are not fine-tuned enough to see the bullet go, right? But Superman, he can see the bullet go every step, right? He's like slow-moing the whole thing, and he can just run alongside it and just see it there and stop it at any point. Be like, no, let's move the bullet a little bit over here, right? Okay, let's have it hit this target. He can change so much, has so much power over it, right? I want to do that with our counterbalance. Right now, as I've been watching you guys in the last few classes, I noticed that it looks more like just firing the gun and then the result. Right? So like start of counterbalance, end of counterbalance. And what I'd like is for you guys to experience and see the slow motion feel of seeing every single moment all the way through the counterbalance. So you're really in control of every moment of it. Does that make sense? Say yes?
Yes. Let's think about what are the bullet points that we want to hit in this Superman slow-mo analysis that we're going to share with the students. We want to excite them, right? So we definitely want to talk about Superman or something like that. But hopefully you saw me explain several different things. You saw me explain the concept of Superman seeing the bullet, right? So the key is I'm talking about something they already know, right? And something that they like, right? Everybody loves Superman, maybe not everyone, but most people love Superman or Superwoman and that concept of being a superhero, right? So I'm connecting that with normal humans, right? And comparing them in a regular life situation of a bullet, something they all understand. And then I bring it into, okay, here's a scenario of dance, and I see you guys acting as humans, right? And I want to get you acting as superheroes, right? I want you seeing every single moment of this. And the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we tie it in with whatever they're working on, right? So I think, okay, I'm going to explain this concept of Superman sees the bullet versus humans just see the beginning and end. And then I'm going to tie it into what I'm working on, right? It's counterbalance, the beginning and end of counterbalance, whereas I want you to be the Superman or the Superwoman that sees every single moment of it. Right. And that's the Superman slow-mo concept. Say, and use Superman or superheroes, use that superhero concept, and then tie it into your beginning and your end of what you want them to go slow motion with, right? It could be a whole basic. You could say, I want you to see every single moment of the basic, right? Or probably, I would probably go even more in depth because a basic usually has like 8 counts to it, right? So I would probably break down like 2 beats and be like, I want you to see every second of these 2 beats and then move on to another 2 beats. I want you to see every second of these 2 beats or something like that. If you're working on, and I probably wouldn't say beats, I'd say of the rock step, of the triple step, of something like that, right? And this is an example, like I've used this a ton of times now. That example I showed you is one of the first times I had started using that concept. And you can get better and better and just tweak and improve it as you go. But it's really, don't spend much time on it. You notice it was 1 minute and 15 seconds or 1 minute and 30 seconds. And then we're into practicing what I want them to practice, right? So it was just a quick way to inspire them. And that is the Superman slow motion. The next concept that I love using is what I call the Jedi Force, right? And this one actually works really well over here as well. So I'm going to put it here, the Jedi Force. And I apologize for my handwriting as well. It's not the cleanest handwriting in the world, but you get the idea. The purpose of the Jedi Force is, again, it's to improve your students and to make sure that they're loving and raving your classes, right? How I go about doing the Jedi Force, the concept is basically, and there's a lot of ways to use this one, but the concept is to get them to close their eyes, right? And you know, like the Jedi, the Force is about using more, it's not about physically moving things as much as it's about like having, I mean, you see them like pull things with their hands and stuff like that. But for me, it's about having senses, about being able to use senses that we don't normally use, right? So like the Jedis, they can control things that the regular human doesn't control, right? And I'll give you my favorite example of this in a second, but I want to start with a really simple one. The simple version of the Jedi Force is just asking them to close their eyes during a move, right? I'm sure you've used this before, but how often do you use it, right? Because it's so valuable to have them do it often, right? And not just the follows, but the leads too, right? Because so many times leads are sitting there looking down at their feet and focusing or looking at the follows feet, and they're not focusing on the feel of the dance, right? And the feel is what it's all about, at least for me. That's a huge part of what the dance is about, is feeling it. And really, like if we're talking about lead follow, right, that's the thing that we need, is to be able to feel what's happening in the dance. So I use this one a lot, have them close their eyes. And I probably, to be honest, don't use it enough. I want to use it more. And one way that I use it all the time that works really well is actually when I'm talking about crowd control or not hitting somebody on the dance floor, or not like, you know, like maneuvering around the dance floor. Floor craft is probably the best way to say it, floor craft. I heard a great name for it, Christina Musser used, was World of Floorcraft is one of her class names, right? So definitely recommend using that name if you want. I mean, I don't know that I have permission to give it away, but I told her I was going to steal it sometime. So World of Floorcraft, great name for a class, all about getting the floorcraft. And getting them to close their eyes. If you think about, like, this is an extreme practice drill in this case. When you want someone to be able to maneuver around a dance floor, not hit people, not hit walls, not kick things, and then you ask them to do it while their eyes are closed, that takes some serious Jedi skills, right? And I make it even harder for them too. I put them in a little corner. I'll take 20 people or 10 or however many people, 50, however many people there are, and I'll put them in a very small space where it's almost impossible for them not to hit other people, not to bump into other people, right? And I'll ask them, I say, this is your job right now, is to make sure, number one, you're not going to hit anybody else. You're going to dance in your own space, right? And then I push them a little harder by getting them in a closed space. And then I push them even harder by saying, okay, follows, close your eyes. And leads, your job is to make sure that the follows don't hit anybody, right? And then I make it even harder by saying, follows, dance as if there's nobody in the room, right? So the follows are supposed to like dance all crazy and really go all out. And the leads are supposed to make sure that they're directing them in ways that they don't get hit, right? So I'm doing an extreme practice drill, which, by the way, an extreme practice drill should be on here. Let's put it down here. Right, because an extreme practice drill is seriously improves people because it gives you a, it makes it, so it pushes them to something that's very difficult, right? So when they go back to their norm, it seems much easier, right? And the second thing is you're making them practice it like consistently 100% of the time versus if you think about a lot of things in dance, like usually you're practicing something at a moment in a move, right? On the 3 and 4, you're practicing it, or something like that, like connection, right? You connect on this moment of a move, and then the rest of the move, you're not focused on that connection. So in extreme practice drill, you get them to focus 100% of the time on whatever it is, right? So floorcraft, not hitting anybody, make them close their eyes, and then have them have the follows trying to dance like crazy, right? This is a hard thing to do, right? And they're practicing it 100% of the time because they're in a close space where they constantly have to be aware. Whereas if they're in a huge room with barely anybody, then every once in a while they might have to worry about bumping into somebody, right? And then so that's the idea. This is an extreme practice drill, the Jedi Force, the way that I'm using it right now by having the leads dance with the follows that our eyes are closed. But after they do that for like 30 seconds or a minute, then I switch and I say, now leads, close your eyes. Follows, it's your job to make sure that the leads don't bump into anyone, right? And I don't care how you do it, but that's your job. Your number one priority is to make sure they don't bump into anyone, they don't run into any walls or anything like that. And leads, now it's your job to dance as if there's no one in the room. Go all out, go crazy, right? So after I do both of those, then I say, okay, now everybody close their eyes, right? And now everybody's job in the room is to take care of each other, to make sure that you don't bump into anyone, that your partner doesn't bump into anyone, and vice versa, right? And people start to realize by going through this whole process that they have a lot more ability to sense what's around them than just their sight, right? You can feel the heat of people around you. And you can feel the heat of people around you, and you can tell when you're getting close to people without actually needing to be with your eyes open, right? Or your partner's eyes open or something like that. And now this is a drill. This is not something, I'm not telling them they should go close their eyes on the dance floor and, you know, socially. The goal is to give them something that's so much harder, right? The extreme practice drill is so much harder than normal that they can then go out and do their norm, and they have those extra senses that they've honed in and practice. So now they have their sight and their feel and volume, like their ears, their sound, whatever. I don't know how to call that right now, but you get the idea. I'm giving them all of those things. And there's hundreds of extreme practice drills. I don't know if there's hundreds. There's definitely at least 10, and there's probably close to 100 extreme practice drills that you can find in the Dance Ninjas dance training portion, as well as the bonus video classes in Dance Ninjas. So I definitely recommend checking those out for more of those, but make your own, right? The only thing you need to know about extreme practice drills is, one, they need to get the person practicing it as close to 100% of the time as possible, it being the topic that you want them to work on. And the second thing is, it should be a little bit harder, ideally, if you can. It doesn't need to have both of these. Really, it could have one or the other, but both is the best. But the second thing, to make it a little bit harder than normal, right? To take away a sense that they normally have. Or like one thing would be throwing stuffed animals at them and they have to remember choreography as they're trying to dodge animals, or things like that that just make it way harder. Okay, so let's see. That's Jedi Force. But again, the simple way of using the Jedi Force is even just having them in any move you do. Have them close their eyes. Have the leads close their eyes. Have the follows close their eyes. Have both people close their eyes. I usually go follows, then leads, then both people, rather than leads and follows, just because it's standard. Like, most people are used to the follow closing the eyes, so like I'm working their way up to something that's a little less normal for them. But you can try out different things. Here in the love and rave category, I call it fail to succeed. So fail to succeed is the concept of having both failure and success in a class, and how vital it is to have both of these, right? If you think about it, let's say I have a class where all that happens, the whole class, is that they fail and fail and fail, right? Like, they constantly are like, I can't do it, I can't do it. And they come out of a class never having succeeded in one of the goals, right? And here's the thing, they might have even succeeded, but they didn't realize they succeeded. If they never realized that they succeeded in anything, they're going to feel like it sucked, right? They're just going to be like, yeah, it was not a fun class, right? Not always, but a lot of the time that can cause a really, we'll call it stereotypically bad classes, when someone never feels like they accomplished anything, right? But at the same time, let's say all they did was succeed. Let's say everything you did was so easy, they got it. They got it. What's next? Got it. Then they never feel like they're challenged. They never feel like you actually taught them something, right? It's just, I could have done that on my own because it was so easy. It was all success, right? The only way to make sure that they succeed, or the only way, I don't want to say the only way, but a surefire way, a way that will definitely show that they succeeded, is to prove that they couldn't do it at first, right? To give them something where they first try it and they do not succeed. They fail at it, right? They do it wrong or whatever it is. I wouldn't use those words, but you get the idea, is they're not actually accomplishing whatever it is. And then you teach them something, and then they succeed, right? It's that transition that makes someone love a class. If you think about your favorite classes, it's probably something where at first you couldn't do it, and then by the end of the class, you could do it. And it's especially awesome if it was something that you didn't even think you could do, right? If it was like, when you came in, you saw that, you're like, oh, there's no way I'm ever going to get to here. I'm just going to stay in this category. And then you get them there. But regardless of that, the key here is to get them to go from something that they couldn't do and actually test and check. Like, give them it and then get them to succeed in it. The tricky part is knowing what level they're at and choosing something that makes them feel like, picking something that's the right level, the level that will work for them, where they actually do fail and then they eventually succeed. If you pick something that's too hard, they never succeed. If you pick something too easy, they never fail, right? Now, one thing I will say is, if you pick something that's too hard it's a little easier to backtrack because you can kind of change your goal, right? You can say, you don't have to tell them right at the beginning of class that the end goal is this move, right? You could just say, I want to see how well we do this move, right? And then you give them the move, you show them it twice, right? And then let them try it. And immediately they're probably going to fail on that one, right? And that's actually another one I could put here is, I'm going to just call it 2 and go. I think there's a better 2 and go, 2 show and go, or something like that. You show them it twice, and then you have them try it. And you tell them that ahead of time, right? That's a really great way to just get them moving really quickly. Some people spend so much time explaining things when really that you don't even know if your students could do it or not yet, right? You might have just been able to get them, show it them twice, and then they do it, and you're like, great, we could move on to something else, right? 5 minutes of class, and probably even 1 minute of class, you realize that entire hour can be spent on something else, right? So one thing I want you to think about is just give them something that you're pretty sure they're going to fail at, right? And have them do it. And then break it down, because then also you're going to see what's not working when you have them try it. You might not need to explain the rock step or the rotational movement or something like that. You might only need to explain one little thing to help them out, right? So get them to try it, let them fail, and then get them to succeed. And if you did something that was too hard for them, then back off a little and just say, okay, I knew that was going to be a little bit difficult. So our goal is going to be to do this move, and you take a move that's kind of like it, but doesn't require as much detail or as much ability, right? And you say, we're going to accomplish this move today, right? And that move is going to make it much easier to do the next move, right? So if you imagine, like, if I were to just look at, what's an example that I can do right now? I mean, like, let's just take something as simple as the Macarena, right? Let's say, like, my thing that I want them to fail at is doing the Macarena while shimmying their shoulders and then their hips on each change. So shoulder, 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 hip, 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 right? Like, that's complex. I was like, what the heck am I doing there, right? So that might be the start. And then I go, okay, that's hard. You guys struggled with that. Let's start with the Macarena, right? And then teach them the Macarena, right? Okay, now let's do the hip thing and the shoulder thing, right? And then if they do both of those really well and you still have time left in class, you can have them try to do both together, right? But then you can also say, you know, you don't have to do both together today. The main goal for today was to be able to do each of those separately. And you guys succeeded in that. And now you can take it as your own homework to put those together if you want, right? And that was a ridiculous example, but I wanted something I could do just quickly that you get the idea of how to piece these things out and make it simple for your students. So that's the fail to succeed concept. And actually, it doesn't just make them love your class. It does do that, but it also proves that they improved, right? It is absolute 100% proof that they improved if they go from not being able to do something to being able to do something, right? So I'm going to put that here as well. All right. The next concept that I'm going to talk about is what I call hidden treasures, right? Hidden treasures. This is a relatively easy concept to understand. It's basically, there are times when you see something that you absolutely love, right? That it just like fills you with joy, right? And it could be something that you learned from someone else, or it can be something that you taught and you just experienced, oh my gosh, this is amazing to teach this. Or even your students just went and were like, oh my God, that was amazing, right? And this one might seem obvious, like it's a hidden treasure. It's one of those things that like your students just go, oh my gosh, that was awesome, right? But here's the key. whenever you find one of those moments, you got to write it down, right? You've got to make sure that you know all your hidden treasures that you can give to people, so that you make sure when you teach a class, there's a hidden treasure in there, right? There's got to be something in there that makes people, oh my gosh, right? And like one example of one of my hidden treasures that I use this in every dip class that I teach, is I teach people not just to do a dip, right? But when they do that dip, I want them to be musical with it, right? So I don't want them to just do the dip the same way every time. I want them to go slowly into it, go quickly, bounce into it, like do a bunch of different things into that dip, right? So my little hidden treasure that I give them is I give them a demo of me doing this to one of two things. Either to one song, all I do is that dip, right? And I just do the dip and I dance musically to it over and over and nonstop, and then fast and then slow and then shuk-ba, right? And so they can see, they can literally do an entire song of dancing only doing one move, and not just a move, but a freaking dip, right? And they can be musical, right? And that gets them that aha moment of, oh my gosh, there's so many ways to do this dip, right? I probably show them a couple hundred ways of doing that dip. And I'm not going to do this for 3 whole minutes because that's just too long, but I'll do it for 45 seconds, right? I'll do it for 30, 45 seconds. And in that 30 to 45 seconds, they're going to see a good 20, 30 different styles of dip, of ways of doing that dip, because the music's forcing me to change, right? Music's going, a-dee-da, a-woo, wop, boop, ba, ha, a-ga, ha, right? And so even just there, they've seen like several different ways of going into that dip. So that's one of my hidden treasures. But every time you get one of those moments where you see either your students' eyes light up or your own eyes light up, write that down. That's one of your hidden treasures, and share those in your classes. They will make your students love and rave about you, right? The more of those you have, the more your students are going to love you. I do not put that in the improve section, although depending on what I do, it could improve, obviously, like getting them to actually move their body in different ways when they do a dip is going to improve them. But for me, I think of it more of something that I use to inspire them, to get them to fall in love with dance. This is the next one. I call it exaggerations versus minimizations. Right? And to be honest, this one, the key to this one, I think, is in minimization. More so than exaggeration, but it depends on the situation. I'm going to talk more about how minimization affects and how I use it compared to how other teachers use exaggeration, right? So if you think when you're teaching somebody something, let's say you want them, like one of the classic examples is someone, they don't want their partner to be rough, right? And you're trying to teach your students not to be rough as leads or rough as follows, but to have a smoother connection, right? That connects nice and slow and smoothly goes, right? So if you want them to have that connection, then there's 2 ways of going about it. There's probably more ways, but you can exaggerate it or you can minimize it, right? You can say, all right, when you dance with someone, you don't want to be jerky, and you can like pull jerky and your follow can like stumble as they get pulled, right? And like, that's an exaggeration. How often do you actually see on the dance floor someone actually stumble, like a follow stumble when they get pulled, right? Like the lead jerking that much might not be an exaggeration, right? There might be leads that do a whole lot of jerkiness, but the follows usually do their best to make it awesome, right? They usually like suck it up and they just, they find a way to rock it out, right? And so by the follow stumbling, you're exaggerating it. Or even if you do stumble, let's say the follow stumbles a little normally, but now you're exaggerating it to a large stumble, then the issue or the thing that I find that's difficult about using that to improve your students is they don't relate to it, right? They see it and they go, oh, I'm not doing that, so we're good. Even if they are, right? Because it's so exaggerated that they can't see it. They don't see their partner doing the same thing, right? When I lead my partner, they don't almost fall, right? So we're good, right? Even though they might almost fall to some degree, it's subtle. It's hard to see, right? So if you go the opposite way, instead of exaggerating it, you minimize it. And you actually, I use a concept, actually another concept that we'll put in here is A versus B. And I use this here, A versus B. I use it a lot with minimizations, is I show, okay, can you guys see the difference between these two options, right? And I do what I want them to do, exactly the way I want them to do it. And then I do the same thing, almost 100% the same, with the tiniest little jerk. It would be like the difference between this. Like, here's what I want them to do. And for whatever reason, I don't want them to use their arm at all this time. So B is going to look like this. See the difference? Really subtle. You probably couldn't see it. Here's A. Here's B. Right? And if I take out A and just show B, it was that. It was like just the tiniest thing, right? And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want them to look at it and go, I can't see the difference, right? I want them to now they want to know what the difference is, right? So they get more buy-in in like, oh, Andrew has some knowledge that I don't. I can't see what he's trying to get across, right? And then once I show them that little, like that difference and they can't see it, then I'll exaggerate it for them. Okay, now watch it again and I'm going to exaggerate it this time. And I'll go like this. And everybody go, oh, you pulled with your arm. Right, but none of you are pulling that much with your arm. But all of you are pulling this much with your arm. And for right now, I don't want any arm pull, right? And this is just an example. There's lots of classes where I do want arm pull for whatever reason. But this is an example of how to take something and make it so small that people can't see it at first. And it should still be there. Your most advanced dancers should, I don't want to say should, but ideally you do it in a way that your most advanced dancers will see it and they'll be like, oh yeah, I can see what's going on here, right? And maybe one of them will be able to do it. You don't want to actually lie to them, right? You want there to be a difference, but it's really tiny. And then when you exaggerate it, they all see it, and now you go back to the other version. You go, okay, now watch it again, and you go back to your minimized version, and I'll do it with you. I bet you'll be able to see it this time if I just go like that, right? Because now you know where to focus. If you focus on this little hinge in the arm, right, you can see it's here, and then as I move, it gets a little bit smaller, right? So now they can see that, and now it feels like you've taught them something, right? Because before, if I just exaggerated and said, we don't want to go like this, obviously, they're like, obviously, we don't want to do that. Nobody, and I'm not doing that. We're all good. But now, since they couldn't see it, they know they're probably doing it, right? Because they couldn't even see it. So of course they're probably doing it. So now they're hyper-focused and paying attention to doing it because they see that it's something that they didn't know. Right? So for me, that's why I use the minimization versus exaggeration, so that I can get them to see those differences. And it's really kind of, it's a format. I go minimize it so that it's really hard to see, exaggerate it so they can all see it, and then bring it back and minimize it again so that they can see what I first showed them, right? And they know where to focus, right? So I go through that process, and then they want to work on whatever it is because they now see that they could improve in that. And then this A versus B drill, I just use that here's A and here's B so that they can put them side by side and try to tell the difference. And it doesn't have to be just done, obviously, in arm pull or rough leads or things like that. If you think about any movement, like just upper body torso movement compared to lower body when you're doing contra posture or something, right? When you're doing that kind of thing, there's moments where people get out of alignment, where their lower and upper body don't twist perfectly with each other. One twists a lot. Oops, that was still good. One twists a lot and the other just twists a little, right? And it's like, and so you can show that as an exaggeration where too much twist versus just the right amount of twist or whatever you want. So that's exaggeration versus minimization. The last thing I wanted to cover is what I call the WWHW, or what, why, how, what else. And this was actually a study that was done by Microsoft, where they realized that there were 4 different types of people, right? There's people that want to know what, people that want to know why, people that want to know how, and people that want to know what else, right? And if you teach a class and you don't cover all 4 of those concepts, then someone's going to be left out, right? Someone's going to feel like, you know, like if you don't cover the why, all the people that are why people are going to feel like that something was missing in that class. It wasn't quite that great of a class, right? Whereas if you cover all 4 of those, you're going to be covering every single person in the process. And ideally, you don't just cover all 4 in like let's say your class is, you know, counterbalance. If you're teaching a class on counterbalance, there's probably going to be subtopics that you talk about as you go through, like the arms or the hips or things like that. And you want to try to cover the what, why, how, and what else for each kind of what I would call topic within your class, right? Basically, think about it like this. If you want them to achieve and do something, then you need to tell them why. You need to tell them how. And obviously, you need to tell them what, right? And then the thing that's the what else is kind of, it's for those people that want a little bit more. Like, what else can I do with this? What more is there with this, right? Or sometimes in dance, I think of it as where else. In other words, like, here's a move like a shoulder shimmy, right? There's a shoulder shimmy, and I can put it at the end of a swing out or at the end of this move, but where else can I put it? I can also put it in the middle of the swing out, in the middle of the move, or whatever else it is. So the what else or where else can be a great thing. It just gives them a little bit more, kind of like, think of it like homework or inspiration for their future learning. And now this one, I think it's interesting. If you look here, all these little 4 marks, this was me marking to make sure that I covered the what, the why, the how, and the what else for each of these. And I don't know that I covered it in all of them, like the extreme practice drill. I'm not sure if I covered a what else for that or not. And it doesn't matter if I cover it for everything, but I need to cover it almost for everything, right? I'm trying to cover it for everything as much as I can, so that I'm sure that I'm giving you guys the what, why, how, and what else, so that you'll come out of here going, I love that. That was great stuff. I really felt like I learned something in that, right? I want to finish by giving you guys a call to action. And so I guess my call to action, like what I'm asking you guys to do with this, is to actually, you know, pick one from each side. Just one from each side. That's it. Pick one of these things and try it in your next class, right? So pick the Jedi Force and Superman slow-mo, or Jedi Force and what, why, how, what else. But just take one of each of those, put them into your next class, and see how that goes, right? And you probably won't do it perfect the first time. It's not, you know, there's going to be little mistakes. You know, when I did what, why, how, what else, I'm sure there were times where I forgot the how or forgot the why or something like that. But it's by doing it and then looking at it and going, did I accomplish that? Did it work? Did people love the class? Did they rave about it, right? That's what helps you, right? And these work for me, but maybe some of them don't work for you. I don't know what tweaks you're going to need to do in order to make certain them work for you, right? And that's the thing. If something doesn't work for you, I'd say try it at least 2 more times while trying to make it work. Don't do it the exact same way. Try to change something that you think might have not worked about it, right? There's so many things where, like Jedi Force, the first time I did it, doesn't work nearly as well as it does now, right? Just because I honed in, like I now know, start with follows, then go to leads, then go to both, right? Like when I first did it, I didn't really have that idea. So you'll improve these as you go and create your own too. Just start as soon as you recognize one, give it a name that will make you remember it, and then use it. Write it down. Use our instructor blueprint to put it in so that you have a place for it, so that you know, I need something to improve my students. I need something to get them to love the class. And every class, teach with one of each of those, or 5 of each. You know, sometimes you'll just notice, like me, I throw that in with this all the time, and don't even think about it, right? There's so many of these that kind of go hand in hand without thinking about it. You might end up using 10 of them in one class. So with that said, use these, improve your students, share dance with the world, and keep on dancing.